Trendstorm.
Welcome back to Trendstorm. Now let's take a look at Kerry's secret diplomacy over Iran. John Kerry admitted to carrying out what some are euphemistically calling shadow diplomacy in trying to save the Obama-era nuclear deal with Iran, which Trump and Pompeo described as potentially illegal and unprecedentedly undermining the foreign policy of the present administration. The former Secretary of State has a personal stake in the survival of this agreement because it defines his legacy of service under the Obama administration, but as a Democrat, he also has political reasons for trying to thwart Trump's plans. Even so, and regardless of intent, the case can be made that Kerry is in violation of the 1799 Logan Act prohibiting civilians from conducting diplomacy contrary to the government's position on any issue. There are, of course, very serious domestic political implications over Kerry's shadow diplomacy, especially in relation to the deep state's incessant efforts to obstruct the implementation of Trump's policies just for the sake of it. But it also speaks to the wariness that some have of the overall strategic consequences of the nuclear deal's failure. The forthcoming reimposition of energy-related sanctions against Iran in November is expected to hit its economy very hard, potentially catalyzing even more wide-scale unrest than what's already on display in the country and possibly leading to more security challenges for its government. Iran is one of the linchpins of contemporary Mideast affairs, with Trump assessing its regional role very negatively, while Kerry is apparently a bit more pragmatic. These contrasting perceptions are also partially responsible for the deep state divide in the State Department, as many Obama-era supporters share Kerry's views while some of them, and especially Trump's appointees and those ideologically loyal to him, stand with the current president. The first-mentioned faction isn't as eager to see Iran destabilized as the latter one is, hence why it's behind Kerry's unprecedented shadow diplomacy, while the second group is regarded as hawks and is eagerly awaiting the hybrid war consequences that Trump's aggressive policies might have for Iran. So, folks, I think we're all a little bit curious about what John Kerry is up to in Iran, because it does seem a little bit bizarre that a former Secretary of State is now cavorting with, we can actually say this, Trump's enemies. So we're going to speak to two guests today to give us further insight into what might be going on and why. So the first one that we're going to speak to today is Mr. Niall Bradley. He is an editor and analyst for the independent news site SOTT.net.
Trendstorm.
Okay, Niall, what exactly does Kerry's shadow diplomacy with Iran aim to achieve in tangible terms, and how successful do you think he'll be?
Well, Andrew, I can't tell you exactly, I'm afraid, because I'm not John Kerry, but I can take a guess. So Kerry, of course, has a history with Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Zarif, developed in the course of negotiating the JCPOA, the Iran deal. I imagine Kerry is telling Zarif something like this: hang in there. Trump isn't forever. Even when Trump's hardline policy kicks in, don't do anything rash. We can still salvage this. Now, I don't think Iran would do anything rash, like, as some people are suggesting, blockade oil and gas transit through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran, much like Russia, actually, it largely just needs to ride out the US's unilateral sanctions while continuing to build capacity in all areas: military, infrastructure, trade, diplomatic relations, etc. So if we go with this and assume that Kerry is holding out to Iran the promise of a return to the pre-Trump status quo, and thus the normalization of US-Iranian relations, we immediately see that its success is highly contingent on US domestic political developments. And that front is so chaotic right now, there's no telling which Iran policy would succeed in the long term. At root, I think the US establishment is so schizophrenic on Iran because it has learned the hard way over the course of its wars in Afghanistan and Iraq that Iranian cultural and political influence in the region is a fact of life, an immovable object. The dispute in Washington over what to do about that fact is whether cooperation on the one hand with Iran or undermining it up to and including regime change or war even is the best, least risky way to contain or manage said Iranian influence.
Okay, well, one of the things that you touched upon is how the success of John Kerry's initiatives are largely dependent on domestic developments in the United States. And if we keep this in mind, though, if we look at also the international perspective of what he's even doing, it's pretty unprecedented that you have a former diplomat, the United States former top diplomat, trying to undermine the policy of the sitting U.S. president. So what kind of consequences could this have internally for the U.S. amidst its ever-intensifying deep state war against Trump?
Right. As I hinted at before, Kerry is probably going rogue because his faction is emboldened by the prospect of victory in this quote-unquote war against Trump. But the problem is this brazen undercutting of Trump then feeds back into the already highly polemic atmosphere in the United States, where pro-Israeli, anti-Iranian views, especially on the Christian right, so Trump's support base, are then further antagonized, which further polarizes the U.S. domestic front as a whole. The thing is, U.S. politics now evolves so much around the question of who loves Israel more, the Republicans or the Democrats. On the face of it, I can only see this undermining the Democrats' goal of retaking Congress in this November's midterm elections, which, of course, undermines their fervent wish to check Trump. Here we're approaching what I suspect may have been Trump's original strategy when he set out to challenge said deep state. Unequivocal support for whatever Israel and its powerful lobby network wants in return for breathing space to effectively some fundamental changes in U.S. domestic policy and its geopolitical outlook.
Okay, thank you very much for explaining all that, Niall. Now, if we keep in mind that we do have this one rogue diplomat in the United States trying to do what he's doing in a bid to retain the nuclear deal against the wishes of his country's sitting leader, how likely do you think it is that maybe he has an Iranian counterpart somewhere trying to do the opposite, in this case, mitigate the effect of Trump's sanctions and possibly probe the prospects for a deal between the two countries despite Tehran's formal opposition to such talks?
It's possible, certainly. I would imagine, though, that no significant Iranian faction would push this line of inquiry too far, because they might signal to Trump that, yes, we are amenable to tearing up the JCPOA. Remember, this standoff hinges on Trump's bet that Iran will back down and agree to some new deal, but specifically one that's more favorable to U.S. investment opportunities in Iran, and also more stringent in checking around military development. So I think that Trump he's emboldened in taking this hardline stance with Iran because of his apparent success when playing this game of chicken with North Korea. You remember how that went, right? It went from imminent nuclear Armageddon to unprecedented peace in the blink of an eye, like pretty much overnight. How this standoff develops then probably hinges on the question of how close the Iranians are to achieving nuclear weapons. And more importantly, I believe, because I suspect the Iranians already have a bomb or two, at what stage is their delivery system, their ballistic missile capability? So in light of how we saw that about turn after North Korea announced completion of its ballistic missile program, here I think the race is on to check Iran before it reaches some kind of equivalent threshold of military deterrence, which in this case might be defined by its ability to successfully repel a combined US-Israeli attack. Thereafter, with its core security needs met, then we may see Iran apparently succumb to Trump's arty deal-making.
Now, this was a very informative conversation that shed more light on Kerry's secretive diplomatic activities with Iran and their cyclical effect on driving the U.S.'s deep state war. I also especially liked how you contrasted the U.S.'s present relations with Iran to those with North Korea. That really gave us a lot to think about, so thanks again. We can see that John Kerry is certainly up to something. That much is unquestionable. But the question is exactly what and how successful will he be? As our guest discussed, it does seem like he's behaving as the good cop to Trump's bad cop. And as Niall drew attention to, this is indicative of the deep state divide inside the United States. We're just seeing this play out on a foreign policy level. So folks, if you want to sound off and share what you think about this, please send us an email at radio@sputniknews.com or find us on Facebook. Stay with us.